Hello! Today we are going to compare fractional numbers. In the previous lesson we defined the algorithm of comparing fractional numbers. And today we're going to solve examples on this topic. Okay, first example. I need to compare fractional numbers, 3/8 and 1/8. That is, I need to put a greater than or less than sign to compare these fractional numbers. I remember the rule and notice that fractional numbers have the same denominator. And this is very important. If the denominator is the same, then we are just comparing numerators. I realize that 3 is a numerator, is greater than 1. And from that, I conclude that 3/8 is greater than 1/8. But that only works if my denominators are the same. So I have 8 equals 8. And only after that do I make a conclusion. So I compare, I take the next step, I compare the numerators. If my denominators are not equal, then I will use a different rule. The next example in which you and I will compare the following fractions, 5/6 and 5/7. In this case, again, I pay attention to the denominators. I don't have equal denominators. I have equal numerators. I note to myself that my numerators are equal. Then I'll compare the denominators. And this is where the reverse rule works. So I'm comparing 6 and 7. I realize that a 6 is smaller than a 7. And what does that give me as a result? Well, the point is that then 5/6s are greater than 5/7s. So, two basic rules. Pay attention to the denominator. If the denominators are equal, we naturally compare the numerators. And the fraction I'm going to have is the fraction that has the larger numerator. When my numerators are equal, the opposite rule applies. That is, if the numerators are equal, I naturally compare the denominators and the fraction will be larger that has a smaller denominator. But again, in order not to get confused by these rules, you can use the general rule, which we will now go over again. I'm going to use the same example, but I'm going to solve it in a different way. Now I'm going to take the same fractional numbers, 5/6 and 5/7. What do I do in this case? Well, in order to avoid getting confused by this rule, I'm going to apply this basic rule. But in order to do that, I need the denominators to be the same. So I have to bring these two fractional numbers to the same denominator. And that's why I find the least common, steepest common denominator for the numbers 6 and 7. And that number is 42, because 42 is divisible by 6, and 42 is divisible by 7. So 42 I divide by 6, that would be 7. And 42 I divide by 7, that would be 6. As a result, I can bring it to a common denominator, so 7 times 5, and that makes 35. 7 times 6, that would be 42. And 6 times 5, that's 30. And 6 times 7, that's 42. And I ended up with two fractional numbers with the same denominator. And this is where it's very easy to compare. The fraction that has the larger numerator is the larger fraction. If you are comfortable with this method, take as a rule to bring to a common denominator, and then you compare only the numerators. Well, here everything is already simple. If fractional numbers have the same denominator, the fraction whose numerator is larger is larger. At the next lesson, guys, we'll see how to compare mixed numbers. That's all for today. Goodbye. See you again.